takes time to go from a more pessimistic outlook to a more optimistic one. It takes time to get there, right? But that's the benefit when you give yourself the space to experience these feelings, because then you're not going to be held prisoner by them forever. The only way these feelings never move is if you don't acknowledge them and you don't ever try to process them. You just sit in it day after day, week after week, month after month, and you're like, man, why do I keep feeling this way? Why does this issue keep coming up?
In your opinion, Arja, why does feeling your feelings mean? What does it even look like?
Sure. Thank you for the question, man. Glad we're talking about this topic, because this is obviously like a pretty common one that we end up discussing a lot in therapy. And especially like you said, for men, it's to me, the first thing is it's about creating that space and that openness to even allow ourselves to experience that emotion, right? You've definitely touched on it several times throughout these lives, like I to give you credit. But part of it to me, when we've talked about journaling before, when we talked about creating healthy support systems, having people around you that you feel like you can trust and confide in, all those create that space, right? It creates that environment for us to be able to experience it. So to use something I know you've mentioned before, sometimes we have the highs, sometimes we have the lows. We don't want to only experience the highs, because then otherwise it doesn't have the same level of intensity or of effectiveness, because we're only thinking about how everything is great. We also have to consider when we're having these not so good moments, when we are not feeling the best, when we might feel saddened by something, if we have a life circumstance that occurs, maybe you have like a family member that gets ill, maybe you at risk of losing your job, not because of your own fault, because the economy that we're in right now. There's so many reasons that aren't necessarily within our control that cause us to have these type of negative emotions. And I'm focusing on the negative ones, because those are the ones we tend to avoid. The positive ones, we'll take all that, give me that, I'll drink that up. We're talking about the negative ones, because these are the ones, specifically in therapy, this is what we have to learn to focus on, because we glide past them so quickly. That's part of, like you've talked about it, that's part of the healing, that's a part of the growth. But we have to be willing to sit in them. So to make it very simple, to feel our feelings, number one, is we have to create the space in order for us to be able to do so. So what that could mean is, I'm not going to, just because I feel bad about something, I'm not going to pretend it's not there. I'm not going to gloss over it. I'm going to create that space for me to be open, even if I'm just by myself in my house, in my room, got everything off. And maybe I'm just going to allow myself to sit there and say, you know what? I am saddened by this. This did bother me. Why do I feel this way? That's just like a very, basic step one.
Wow. Yes, like you're speaking facts. I'm literally just taking it in, taking it all in. I love how you mentioned creating that space. That's absolutely crucial. Because as you will know, as you grow into life, when you don't create that space, that feeling becomes you. You eventually start identifying as that feeling. It becomes bigger than you a lot of the time. So it's important for us to create that space so we can observe it, and that way kind of just like, okay, I acknowledge it, like RJ said, I am feeling that way. Then from there, like whatever time it takes for us to heal, then you can move on. But I love that you said that, because at the end of the day, like that space is absolutely crucial. Like a lot of us want to like kind of force that healing and force those emotions to come out. And sometimes, like it's that space, whether it is like, even if you're by yourself, sometimes you're with the wrong people that might not allow you to really feel those feelings without judgment and with love. So I appreciate you mentioning that, because that's 100% fact.
Yeah.
I 100% love that. So, but I already kind of like touched on this a little bit. Why do you think it's beneficial though for us to feel our feelings?
You said, why is it beneficial?
Why do you think why is it beneficial?
Oh man, there's a there's a plethora of reasons why. Let me try not to go off on a tangent, but to me, like kind of piggybacking on what we were just saying, right? If we allow ourselves to feel, then we can not only move through those negative experiences, but then it'll allow us to also grow because it requires us to challenge our thinking and to like evolve on certain subjects or certain topics. We have to allow ourselves the space to do that. So
Mm.
if I allow myself to feel and go through that space, whether that, again, this doesn't necessarily mean you immediately jump into therapy with somebody. This is just what you can do on your own, what you can do literally in your own space, in your own room, wherever, whatever that may look like. Even if you just have a closet or you have the bathroom for 15 minutes, like you can do this, or the shower, right? You can do it in the shower. I don't know if you guys like to introspectively think. I sometimes talk to myself in the shower because it's just, I don't know. It's just it feels nice to be able to do so, even if you want to cry. You know, especially if you're a man and you don't want to feel like you're crying. Great way to mask it, but you still get to practice the emotion.
Yeah, it's just
So,
water
yeah.
going down your face.
Right.
It's
It's
just,
just, oh,
it's
it's
not
just
my
water. It's just water that came from my body. That's all it is. So there's no issues there. But yeah, man, it's like the benefits are tremendous. You know, especially if you talk about not only for internal growth, but you talk about like relationship building. If I'm dating somebody and they say something that I disagree with, right? It's so important to create that environment where I allow myself to feel what I need to feel, because if I don't do that, what happens is what we've touched on before, all that stuff gets pushed down and pushed down and pushed down. And then when she may want to have a conversation with me, I don't have a healthy way to let that out. It's going to come out like a tornado or like a typhoon or giant wave of emotion, you know, because I don't give myself the space to sit in and say, okay, I feel like this about this. I'm gonna make sure I talk about that, and I feel this way about this. I'm gonna make sure I touch on that in a very, it's somewhat of an order, right? But when I don't do that, it makes it very, very difficult for me to be able to share and engage with her. So that she might get really, really upset with me, which then further reinforces me not sharing. It makes me want to suppress even more. And we have this very, very negative vicious cycle, right? So we don't want to create those environments where we're not going to be open and we're not going to be transparent about how we're feeling. But when we're first getting started, it takes time, right, to practice to get used to that. That's why I brought up the shower. Like, that might sound kind of silly, but people need those spaces. And for men, we know it's very difficult for us to naturally want to engage in that. So this is a way for us to create that outlet and create that space, because at the end of the day, we want to be able to not only be open about how we're feeling, but again, to experience the highs and the lows as we move through life. Because we all know, you've lived long enough, you probably know, life is not on a straight line, right? It's always going to be the ebbs and flows and the ups and downs as we continue. So we have to kind of bake in room for that. So it's part of our practice of self-care. That's really what feeling the emotions for each of us is about.
I love that. As you're saying that, I'm also like the word judgment is coming to my mind a lot. I feel like we tend to, and not specifically judging ourselves, but really judging feelings as either bad or good. And yes, some can be helpful, some can be unhelpful, but I think it's important for us to remember that they're just feelings, all of them. And when we move away from that judgment, then we don't, okay, I'm only going to feel the good ones. I'm only going to, like, you can just feel them all, however they. So whenever you start feeling the all of that judgment coming in and like all those labels for those feelings, oh, this feeling is good, this feeling is bad. Even the word helpful and unhelpful can be a judgment if not used properly. So
Absolutely.
Right. So definitely, I definitely think it's important for us to like, okay, what am I actually feeling? Because it's something that I've learned recently. It's that feelings are very physical. Yes, like you'll feel them in your body most of the time. So it's hard for you to be like, no, but I'm not feeling. Like, yes, you will feel it in your body. Like that's just how it is. So that's okay. That's okay. So make sure that you look at your body. How is your body feeling? Are you feeling like, are you feeling contraction? Are you feeling expansion? How are you feeling? Like, really pay attention to everything. Right. And try and work on moving away from that judgment, because that's going to make it a lot easier for you to just allow feelings to be. I like one of my favorite quotes is, you are the sky, your feelings are just the clouds. Like, they're eventually just going to go away. Observe them. Like, you're going to be there regardless of what happens. The clouds are eventually going to move past. So
Yeah.
that I just love to look at feelings that way, and I think that's a really I'm a very visual learner, so I think it's a very visual way to look at them, right? So when you realize like, hey, I'm the sky. Yes, it's really cloudy right now. Whoa, it's storms. Like it's stormy today. Like what's going on? But what's up
Yeah.
with every storm, typhoon, hurricane? I'm from the Caribbean. I know about hurricanes. They pass. And usually, like, it's almost like a guarantee that there's calm after the storm.
Yeah.
And that comes back to what we were talking about, how like life comes, it's up and down. So if you feel like you're down, like you're in a storm, what can you most likely be sure of that there's ups coming. Like there's gonna be the sun's gonna come out again, rainbows are gonna come out. Like that's how life works.
You know what's so you know what's so interesting about that though, Carlos? It's so interesting when you're in the moment, right? I talk about this all the time. Like personally, I've experienced this, and professionally, I see this all the time. Like you're so right. Or you talk about the clouds passing. There's so many different ways to say this, right? You can't see down the road. Like you know that expression, like you can't see the forest through the trees.
Mm.
Like you don't know. I usually ask this question or I make this statement like when I'm working with somebody. Like you're in this moment right now, right? It is the end of August 2022. Imagine where you will be in 3 months from now. Imagine where you might be 6 months from now. Imagine where you might be a year from now. And what's interesting when you ask somebody that question is, there's typically two different ways somebody's going to respond. I could consider them like an optimistic and a pessimistic way of looking at it. The pessimistic way might be, man, that is absolutely terrifying. I don't want to know what happens when I get there. Like, I don't even want to imagine a year from now because I feel like absolute crap right now, right? Then the other side is, I'm excited. I don't know what it's going to look like. In each of those scenarios, I don't know. None of us know the future. But I'm excited for what could be. It's hard to naturally transition to this side. It takes time to go from a more pessimistic outlook to a more optimistic one. It takes time to get there, right? But that's the benefit when you give yourself the space to experience these feelings, because then you're not going to be held prisoner by them forever. The only way these feelings never move is if you don't acknowledge them and you don't ever try to process them. You just sit in it day after day, week after week, month after month, and you're like, man, why do I keep feeling this way? Why does this issue keep coming up? This is a perfect example, at the most randomest times. Why did that happen? And I'm like, listen, if we have these things that we've never dealt with for years, what makes you think that it's gone all of a sudden? Why do you think that just because 10 years went by, all of a sudden I'm better now? Everything's fantastic. I'm great. I'm like, sir, ma'am, no, it's still there. That's why we have to deal with it. Because I don't want you to be stuck in that mentality. I want you to help you move over to this more optimistic outlook to life. Because life can feel much grander. The sun comes out, the clouds move, as you said. But I gotta be willing to do that work. So I just wanted to give that example.
I agree, and just to add what you said too. When you're feeling these feelings, like I mentioned this in past conversations, it's gonna hurt. Like if you're just watching us today, like I want you to understand that it will hurt. Because you were experiencing all that pain, suffering, whatever it might be. Again, like you're facing it. But the more that we do it, the more that we journal, we go to therapy, we meditate, whatever it is that you're doing to do that healing, the more that you can start observing and like just, okay, this is the feeling that I'm feeling. And then eventually like it doesn't have to become you. So know that as you dive in and you start like really asking yourself those questions and you start really noticing and being intentional about being aware about your feelings, it will hurt. But that's where the healing happens. I know that RJ in past calls mentioned an amazing like just visual. Like if you have a cut and you have dirt in there, and you just like it's gonna hurt when you're cleaning it out and you're putting some alcohol in there. Might get some stitches. It's gonna hurt, but it's gonna hurt a lot more if you just let it be. If you just let it be and you're like, you know what, I'm just gonna ignore it. It's in the back of my arm, so I'm not gonna look at it. Like,
that's amputation, bro. That's amputation. I gotta take it off now. I gotta take it off. I waited too long. It's gone.